Catherine Mary Bush, known to the world as Kate Bush, was born on July 30th, 1958 in Bexley Heath, Kent, England. Her family was anything but ordinary. Her father, Robert, worked as a general practitioner, but in his free time he loved playing the piano. Her mother, Hannah, was a nurse, but outside of work she practiced traditional Irish dancing. One of Kate's older brothers, Paddy, made musical instruments, while the other, John, was a poet and a photographer. Surrounded by such creativity, Kate almost had no choice but to grow up an artistic soul. From an early age, she was drawn to the piano that stood in their home. By the age of 11, she had already learned to play the organ and the violin and began writing her own songs, remarkably melodic and emotionally deep for a child of her age. Interestingly, Kate was also fascinated by sports for a time, particularly karate. She was inspired by her brother, who taught karate at Goldsmiths College, where she earned the nickname E for her high-pitched ki shouts. By the age of 15, Kate had already honed her songwriting skills, and her brothers began helping her record demo tapes. In just a year, she managed to record around 50 songs, rich with metaphors, literary allusions, mysticism, and dreamlike imagery. Even then, her distinctive theatrical approach to music was starting to show. Her brothers tried to get the demos to record labels, but without the right connections, it was a dead end. Luckily, those connections soon appeared. A friend of her brother John, Ricky Hopper, happened to know Pink Floyd's guitarist David Gilmour. Through Hopper, Kate's demos landed in Gilmour's hands. Wanting to hear more from this young talent, Gilmour offered to professionally record one of her songs at his studio. That's how, in 1973, the first official Kate Bush recording, Passing Through Air, came to life. Impressed with the result, Gilmour brought in sound engineers who had worked with the Beatles to help the 16-year-old Bush create a polished demo tape. It was essentially a calling card for the young singer, beautifully packaged like a gift. But in truth, Gilmour may not have needed to go to such lengths. By the mid-1970s, the British music scene was stagnating, and major labels were desperate for fresh talent that could break through. When word spread that Gilmour had discovered a remarkable new artist, the labels lined up almost instantly. After much discussion, Gilmour insisted that Bush sign with EMI Records. The label not only recognized her talent but also offered a thoughtful plan for her artistic development. When Kate signed the contract, she had just turned 18, and EMI's producers understood that early success or failure could shape her entire future. So they gave her a 2-year advance, encouraging her to finish her studies and refine her craft. Until the end of 1977, Kate Bush focused on finishing school, studying dance and mime under renowned choreographer Lindsay Kemp to develop her theatricality and stage presence, and occasionally performing with the KT Bush Band in London pubs, where she tested out her material and learned the art of live performance. And then, as 1978 arrived, Kate Bush stormed into the music industry, bursting through the doors with a bang. In January, she released her debut single, Wuthering Heights, and it landed like a bombshell. Inspired by Emily Bronte's novel, the track was a phenomenon in pop music. No one before her had ever chosen such a literary, almost gothic piece as their debut. The song combined an unusual structure, unconventional melodies, and a completely new vocal style. High-pitched, at times almost hysterically expressive, breaking free from the boundaries of traditional pop delivery. The risks paid off. By March 1978, Wuthering Heights had reached #1 on the UK singles chart, where it stayed for 4 weeks. Kate Bush became the first woman in British history to write and perform her own song that topped the national chart. Her debut single was followed by an equally striking debut album, The Kick Inside. For a 19-year-old, it was an impressively mature work. From the intimacy of The Man with the Child in His Eyes to the philosophical reflections of Them Heavy People, each song highlighted her unique artistic voice. The title track stood out for its dramatic intensity and its taboo theme, while Strange Phenomena foreshadowed her future experiments with mysticism and the irrational. The album was more than a debut. It was a manifesto of a new kind of pop art, where poetry and theater finally found their place in popular music. Unsurprisingly, critics praised it enthusiastically and sales were strong. In the UK, it climbed to #3 on the charts. Even then, it was clear that Kate was bringing a completely new language into pop. A fusion of literary depth, theatricality, and musical experimentation. But such a rapid rise in fame also came with downsides. EMI pushed her to release a second album in the shortest time possible, and so in November 1978, Lionheart appeared. Unlike the debut, which had been carefully developed over 2 years, Lionheart was written under pressure, leaving little room for true creative freedom. Even so, the album was a commercial success, reaching number 6 in the UK and producing notable tracks such as Wow and Symphony in Blue. Yet overall, critics, and Bush herself, felt it lacked the cohesion and maturity of her first record. The second major challenge came with her concert series, The Tour of Life. Lavish, theatrical, filled with costumes and complex choreography, it was simply overwhelming for a young artist. The experience was so draining that Kate decided never again to embark on such a large-scale tour, instead embracing the role of a studio perfectionist, with only rare live performances. At the same time, the struggles she faced at the start of her career helped her realize what she truly wanted and the direction she needed to take. That's why the early 1980s became a transitional period for Bush, when she began taking full control of her own artistry. In September 1980, Kate released her third album, Never Forever. It was the first record where she took an active role in production, working alongside John Kelly. For Kate, this was a step toward independence. She no longer wanted the sound of her music to be shaped entirely by others. The album went straight to number 1 on the UK charts, making history as the first time a female solo artist's album had ever debuted at the top in Britain. The single Babushka turned her into a true pop star of the early 80s. With its dramatic flair and striking heroine, the song became one of her signature tracks. Other key songs like Army Dreamers and Breathing showed her ability to fuse music with weighty themes: war, ecology, and the fear of nuclear disaster. For audiences, it was a clear sign that Bush wasn't going to limit herself to love ballads and light pop hits. After the success of Never Forever, Kate shifted her focus to exploring new forms. She appeared less in the media and spent more time in the studio, studying emerging recording technologies. At the time, Britain was abuzz with the arrival of the Fairlight CMI digital sampler, and Kate was one of the first artists to master it. This tool allowed her to realize complex, almost cinematic ideas in her music, completely transforming her approach to composition. All of this came to fruition in 1982, with the release of The Dreaming, her first album produced entirely by herself. It was a defining step. She now had full creative control, but with it came full responsibility. The Dreaming turned out to be the most experimental project of her career. Critics often described it as Britain's answer to the avant-garde, full of sharp rhythms, dense layers of sound, samples, and unconventional vocal techniques. The songs touched on everything from Australian Aboriginal culture to criminal schemes, from folklore to social protest. The title single, The Dreaming, sounded heavy and impenetrable to mainstream listeners, and the album failed commercially, peaking at number 3 before quickly falling off the charts. But in terms of artistic growth, it was a turning point. It proved that Kate would not bend to industry expectations. She had chosen the path of an original innovator, even if it cost her mass popularity. Naturally, this direction didn't sit well with EMI, who tried to push her back toward the style of her late 70s work. After the lukewarm reception of The Dreaming, Kate retreated almost completely from public life. She rarely appeared on television, gave almost no concerts, and distanced herself from the mainstream audience. This period could be called her seclusion, a time when she reevaluated her path, searched for new ideas, and immersed herself in the technical side of studio work. And it wasn't in vain. Kate understood that her early success had come not just from talent, but from years of preparation, practice, and testing material. That's why those quiet years ultimately worked in her favor. In September 1985, Kate released her fifth album, Hounds of Love, a triumph both commercially and critically. It shot to number 1 on the UK charts and reached the top 40 in the United States, turning Bush into an international star. The lead single, Running Up That Hill, A Deal with God, climbed to number 3 in Britain and became her calling card. The track fused a profound philosophical idea, the wish for a man and woman to swap places and truly understand each other, with a powerful, dramatic sound built on synthesizers and drum machines. The album itself had a fascinating structure, divided into 2 distinct halves. The first side was more accessible, with radio-friendly singles like Running Up That Hill, Cloud Busting, and Hounds of Love. The second side was a conceptual suite titled The Ninth Wave, telling the story of a woman lost at sea, drifting between sleep and death. This balance made the record unique. It worked as both a pop album and a piece of avant-garde art. Her visual ambitions also stood out, especially in the cloud-busting video starring Donald Sutherland, which turned the song into a short cinematic story. Following the success of Hounds of Love, Kate barely toured, but her music was everywhere. She focused on studio work and visual projects. In 1986, she released The Whole Story, a compilation of her videos which included the new single Experiment 4, a dark, philosophical track about military research into sound as a weapon. Its gothic, film-like video cemented her reputation not just as a singer, but as a multimedia artist, someone who thought in albums, videos, and concepts rather than standalone hits. Between 1987 and 1988, Bush seemed to vanish again, but the industry sensed that this was simply preparation for another artistic leap. And in October 1989, she returned with her sixth album, The Sensual World. Here, she embraced a softer, more intimate and sensual sound, moving away from the conceptual drama of Hounds of Love. The title track was inspired by Molly Bloom's monologue in James Joyce's Ulysses. When the author's estate refused permission to use the text, Kate wrote her own version capturing its spirit. The result was tender yet erotically charged, revealing her as a mature songwriter. Other highlights included this woman's work. Originally written for John Hughes' film She's Having a Baby, it became one of her most emotional and enduring ballads, addressing themes of female sacrifice and pain. Over time, it gained cult status and remains one of her most frequently used songs in film and television. The album also featured Love and Anger and Rocket's Tale, where Bush continued to experiment with form and arrangement. The Sensual World reached number 3 in the UK, proving her relevance, even as her music grew more niche and less concerned with mainstream charts. Once again, after its release, Kate withdrew from the spotlight. By the early 1990s, she was deliberately distancing herself from a pop industry that was accelerating into a new era. It increasingly felt as though commercial success no longer mattered to her. She had already proven herself years before. Now, she simply wanted to create pure art. In November 1993, she released her 7th album, The Red Shoes. Unlike the intimacy of The Sensual World, this record was more lively and open, infused with rock and folk elements. Much of that came from collaborations with guest musicians, including Eric Clapton, who played guitar on And So Is Love, and Prince, who co-created Why Should I Love You. The lead single, Rubber Band Girl, revealed a surprisingly playful side of Kate, while Moments of Pleasure became one of her most personal works, dedicated to friends and loved ones she had lost. Despite strong material, the album peaked at number 2 in the UK and drew mixed reviews. Some critics felt it was less groundbreaking than her earlier records. But then again, was Kate really seeking approval or chasing success at this point? Absolutely not. In interviews, she admitted feeling frustrated that people always expected her to deliver some revolution, some radical leap forward. Yet, The Red Shoes was an album of shared emotion and pain, intimate and heartfelt in a way that no innovation could replace. After this disconnect with the industry, Bush chose seclusion once more. But this time, it wasn't to prepare for a dramatic comeback, it was to live life for herself. In the 1990s, Kate began a relationship with guitarist Danny McIntosh, and in 1998, their son Albert was born. She found fulfillment in motherhood and the quiet rhythm of home life. Music was no longer on her mind. She wasn't writing, she wasn't recording. Once one of the brightest talents on the British scene, Kate Bush lived in Kent in near-complete seclusion, dedicating herself to her home and raising her child. It wasn't until 2005 that she made an unexpected return with the double album Ariel. It was the long-awaited comeback that showed her years in retreat had not dulled her gifts but instead deepened them, giving her music maturity and fresh life. The record's 2-part structure reflected her ambition. The first disc, A Sea of Honey, offered standalone songs including the playful and ironic King of the Mountain, which reflected on fame and loneliness. The second, A Sky of Honey, was a continuous suite capturing the cycle of a single day from dawn to dusk. The soundscape was warm and organic, rooted in live instruments, while the lyrics blended intimate observations of everyday life with a meditative depth. Ariel didn't chase hits or radio formats. It was an artistic statement, proof that Bush had returned not for the industry but for the music, preserving her unique voice and enriching it with hard-earned experience. She didn't stop there. Years of seclusion had also made her rethink some of her past work. In 2011, she released Director's Cut, revisiting and re-recording songs from The Sensual World, 1989, and The Red Shoes, 1993. It was her way of correcting what she had never been satisfied with in the originals, refining the sound, the vocals, and the arrangements. That same year, she surprised fans again with her 9th studio album, 50 Words for Snow. Consisting of just 7 tracks, it unfolded like a single atmospheric canvas, filled with silence, stillness, and the cold breath of snow. She collaborated with artists such as Elton John and Steve Gadd, while the single Wild Man, inspired by the legend of the Yeti, became the album's most prominent track. Critics praised the record, confirming that Kate Bush was still capable of creating timeless, surprising works. Then, in 2014, she stunned the world once more with her concert series Before the Dawn at London's Hammersmith Apollo. It was her first live performance in 35 years and became a true cultural milestone. All 22 shows sold out in minutes. The program blended early hits like Running Up That Hill with full theatrical stagings of album cycles such as The Ninth Wave and A Sky of Honey. In many ways, it felt like a farewell to her audience. After the shows, Kate once again retreated into private life, where she remains to this day. And yet, even without her presence, the industry can't seem to forget her. Proof came when Running Up That Hill, A Deal with God, was rediscovered by a new generation through the series Stranger Things. Nearly 40 years after its release, the song soared back to the top of the charts, hitting #1 in the UK and becoming a global hit all over again. Kate Bush is a rare example of an artist who, from the very beginning, refused to follow the rules of the industry and instead built a career on her own terms. From the gothic visionary of Wuthering Heights to the mature author of philosophical works like Ariel and 50 Words for Snow, she has always fused poetry, theatricality, and musical experimentation. Her long disappearances only added to her aura of mystery, while her returns, whether with Hounds of Love, the Before the Dawn concerts, or the revival of Running Up That Hill in the 21st century, have each become cultural events. Today, Kate Bush stands as a symbol of artistic independence, proving that staying true to your inner voice matters far more than fleeting fame.